like 96% of prisoners are men, it blows my mind that we would have a policy that's really progressive and I believe in, and then we just cut out 96% of people that would benefit from it because they're born bad, they're not deserving of it. And I did not understand why they would do that, but then someone said it to me, they're trying to empty women's prisons so you can stick more men in. And I actually think that might actually be true. And that's why it's so bewildering, because I believe in these progressive ideas like prison reform, but I want that to be a universal thing, not just for women, especially when there's women make up a tiny minority of those who'd benefit of it.
Do you ever get overwhelmed by the work that you do? I see you fight the fight and all the subjects that you speak so passionately about here. Does it ever feel like too much on your shoulders to carry this weight?
Yeah, all the time. I'm like, speak to my girlfriend all the time, who always helps me out. And I'm like, it's so difficult. Like it's I feel like I'm being gaslit constantly. So I look at this data and I'm just like, what?
Why is nobody else seeing this?
Why is no one fucking like, boys are behind in education in this country and have been for my entire adult life, so nearly 35 years. And they're behind at every stage. And they're behind in more or less every single country in the West. And there's nothing. Very few. No, if that was me, that would be frontline news on every paper in the land every single day until we solve the problem. And yet, not only do we not believe it, we don't care. And people will actually assert women and girls are behind. And like women and girls were behind in education, but not anymore. And in fact, boys are now further behind in education than women were 50 years ago. So we've not actually got any closer to equality. In fact, we're further away. We've just flipped it around. And unlike 50 years ago, we're not doing a policy change. We're not doing the campaigning or the funding into it. We don't care. So that's why I'm reading these facts, boys behind education, every stage, every country, and then the fingers go in the ears. And
that was going to be my next question. Are boys failing school, or is school failing boys?
I always have to say, I don't know. No one knows why boys are behind. And that's the problem. The interesting thing about the boy-girl gap is that soon it's going to be bigger than the class gap. Like, rich kids are ahead of poor kids. And there are loads of gaps in education. Like, we know, white students are ahead of black students, and rich students in private school are ahead of public school, and et cetera, et cetera. And we may not like those gaps, but we can sort of understand why they exist. We understand why private schools do better than public schools. I don't agree with it. I want to abolish private schools, but I can understand why it's there. Interesting thing about boy-girl gap is that two people coming from the same house, same socioeconomic group, going to the same school with the same teachers, like all the controls are naturally in place, and boys are doing significantly worse than girls at every stage. So we don't understand why, and that's the problem. Like there was no one asking us questions. There's no.
Do you think boys feel trapped? Is it this Victorian system that's so far behind that boys want to roam and they have this?
I can give you some ideas. I can give you certainly ideas, but I mean, I would say people like Richard Reeves are world-leading experts in this particular area, and he doesn't know. He's like, I don't know. No one knows. He's like, I'm asking policy people, and they're like, we have ideas, but we don't actually know. But there's arguments that the way we educate children in general is less suitable for boys, and the way we grade students is less suitable for boys. So a lot of it's based on teacher assessments. And because boys are perceived as naughtier, they're marked down. So boys of the same educational intellectual ability are being marked lower than girls. That's doubly so for black boys, but just boys in general. So marked down for the same work, that's a big problem. Not enough male teachers in school, like that's getting worse and worse and worse. Like if you set up a company where 80% of the directors of that company were male, naturally that organisation would benefit men in general. But that's exactly what's happening in schools. 80% of teachers are women, and through no fault of their own, not intentionally, that is creating a system that is benefiting girls in the same way as that a male company would benefit men and boys. So that's a problem. People argue that boys develop later in life, like cognitively, like they're more immature, and they argue that's actually biological. And some people think we should hold boys back, like boys should start a year later than girls. That's called redshirting, really controversial. Richard Reeves is talking about it a lot. A lot of people don't like it because I feel like you're not actually fixing the problem. You're basically penalising the boy and holding him back. I don't really understand. And just generally, like in terms of scholarships and awards, they're overwhelmingly for women and girls. Like the vast majority of scholarships still go to women, and yet in America, women outnumber men in education in every group. Every single racial group, women are ahead, and yet they still get most of the awards. And I'm like, how could you possibly justify that?
was interesting, your last post, and you making the point for the disparity between the instinct of boys to move more, to be curious, and to have that physical energy, and the disparity between that and the educational conditioning in which they're forced to be seated or sat still for 6 hours on average a day. And then that has this negative knock-on effect where they are being often diagnosed as having attention deficit disorder, and then a really additional sinister step in which drugs are being allocated to calm the boys down so that they can stand in line for the education system to take them through the examination process or the tests and everything that is very much set in stone, as you know, Matt said, in almost a Victorian-esque way.
Yeah. I mean, let me caveat that. There's an ongoing conversation right now in my comments where people are disputing the ADHD thing. Some people think it is overdiagnosed in boys. Some people think it isn't. Some people think it's underdiagnosed. So let's put a big question mark over that bit. But this is something I really relate to. Like when I was a boy, and still now, I really struggle to sit quietly and read a book. And so much of education is based around quiet book learning. Like you said, 6 hours every day, a child has to sit down quietly and read. And that doesn't help anyone. Like that harms girls too. But I feel like boys are just less able to cope with it because they're just pumped full of testosterone. And you want to, when I try and read a book, my girlfriend's reading her book in bed, I'm reading my book in bed, and she's like, what do you want to do now? I'm like, I want to get this fucking book and I want to throw it across the room. And like, I drove here, and I love driving here because it's the one time where I actually get to listen to audiobooks.
Yeah.
And like, I love audiobooks. Like I listen to audiobooks all the time, and I want to move, I want to drive, I want to take my dogs out for a walk, I want to jog, go to the gym, and that's how I read books. The idea of me sitting quietly in bed with my girlfriend, and she's just page after page after page.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't
She's
it?
like, where are you? I'm still on page 1.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I hate books. So I resonate with that. And that's not new. I've been like that. I was a little shit in school, real class clown. Like I was constantly seen as a naughty boy. But I don't think I was naughty. I was just bored. I was disengaged.
Curious.
I wasn't listening. I was like, this isn't good. And you act up when you're bored. And you're classified as naughty and you're marked down by teachers. And I did awful in school. Awful. Like D. And so did my dad. He got E's. And then he went on to become one of the leading neuroscientists in the world. And they actually now write about him in the very textbooks he hated to read. And I'm like, he got E's. He got E's. And now he's like this world-renowned figure, or was. And I just think the way we teach fails everyone, especially boys, because boys don't want to learn that way. And like boys want to play. And I know in that same post I was talking about homework. And homework specifically for younger children often doesn't really have any benefit, because that's time where boys and girls should be playing, like learning about the world, doing physical activities, not going home and doing more work, more sitting and reading. So that's for young children. That is not to be used as an excuse to not do homework. So please do your homework. But
what would you change on the school syllabus to enhance the life of boys?
It's so funny because another caveat. I always have to acknowledge the fact that I'm not the right person to be sat in this chair. I am not qualified to answer that question. But simultaneously, I acknowledge that I'm the best you've got. Like, it shouldn't be me doing this, but unfortunately it is. And that's because politics and political scientists, academics have betrayed us. So I'm sat here. But what I would do, just more physical learning, more spatial learning, more kinesthetic learning, more physical activity, more exercise, less homework, less sitting, basically the opposite of what we've currently done, and more men in school, more men teaching in school. Like male teachers have been shown to are less likely to problematize boys' so-called bad behavior because they can recognize it. Like, I'm sure you've got boys, right? And like, you must recognize.
Yeah, I've got some.
I have a girl.
A boy, and like you must be like, he's not really naughty, he's just bored.
Yep.
And like, I think men are able to recognize that.
Yep.
Because I'm that boy. I'm that boy growing up. So if and when I have a child, and if I have a boy that's like that, I'm gonna be like, sorry, teacher, he is not a stupid boy. Yeah. He's just really bored by your learning style. And I would try to challenge our perspective of naughty boys and try to see it as disengaged boy.
It seems to be a running theme of this conditioning, which can thread from education through to more institutionalization. I feel for a lot of dads, they might feel a little bit stuck, and they might be coming to a point in which they're becoming more aware of their day-to-day experience, and their paradigm of experience has been largely shaped by that conditioning that they've had from a young age right through to the current job that they go to the 9 to 5 now.
Yeah.
2 questions for you.
Just quickly before, can I jump in on that? That is true, because this idea of school seems to think that only learning from books is what's valuable. Physical learning is boring. That's obviously part of a bigger problem where we seem to look down on blue-collar jobs, and that's just not right. Those are really important jobs. They keep society moving, like electricians, plumbers, all of that. And like if you were to sit down a boy and you were to show him the job of an electrician and the job of a lawyer, I would say most boys would be like, I want to do the electrician. Both of them probably going to get paid the same as well. And yet we look down, scoff at electricians. And I'm like, why is that? Like, why we should be lifting up those jobs too. Like, those are really powerful, important jobs to everybody, arguably more important than lawyers. And like, we shouldn't be mocking them. We should be encouraging that to be like a bigger part of our sort of ambitious childhood sort of outlook.
So I suppose my two questions to you on that are, was there a point in your life where you started to feel and be able to differentiate between the conditioning that you were experiencing and potentially that was influencing your day-to-day life or paradigm or actions, and how you actually wanted to live and behave closer to your truth? And how did you start to unwrap that conditioning and be more liberated? And then the second part of the question is, what advice would you have for dads listening to this who feel a sense of that in their lives at the moment?
I mean, I'm not a dad, so it's difficult to give advice to dads, but I'll try my best. But for me, I hated school. I did so bad, like I said, D's. But there's one thing I did well at, and that was film. And that's because my dad gave me a camera, and that was it. Like all of this disinterest and everything, I was just like, this is what I'm supposed to do. Finally, a vessel through which I can express myself. I can run around the garden, film, my cat, my plants, my friends, and little bugs, and just make this miraculous film. I pirated editing software, and I made films. And luckily, my college was like the leading media production college in the country, and I graduated as the top student of that college. And I was just like, I'm not an idiot. My grades in science and everything are D, psychology D, English language D, sports science D, but distinction in media. So I'm grateful that I was given that camera, and it doesn't have to be a camera, but like there are different ways of learning, different ways of expressing yourself, and different careers to be followed that are not desk-based jobs, book-based jobs. And there's more than one type of learning. And I guess I would encourage dads and mums to help their sons, and all children, but especially their sons, to find out what that is. For me, it's a camera. It could be a paintbrush. It could be a pen. It could be, going out and taking photographs and stuff like that. Like,
be a YouTuber.
I mean, it's pretty saturated.
Start a podcast.
Yeah, well,
page.
That's the thing. Like I get, like I said, I don't get anything from this area of work. There's no money here for me. But there's other things that are not monetary that I find really rewarding. Otherwise, I wouldn't have carried on doing it. And I love being able to express myself through these different creative mediums. Unfortunately, filmmaking, which is my trade, I can't do because it's too expensive. But I would love to make films about this. I'd love to make animations. I'd love to write more. So I value. I
feel like you will one day.
Yeah. I
know you will.
I'm always like, whenever I talk about this in podcasts, I'm like, if you've got a few £1,000, send it to me, please, because I'll make it go a long way. But yeah, for me, it's film, and it doesn't have to be that, but just respect. There's more to learning than books.
Could we talk a little bit about guy time, the importance of it? I know you've spoken about this before with Robin Dunbar's study about men spending 2 quality nights a week together. There's a recurring phrase in the men's shed movement that men don't talk face to face, they talk shoulder to shoulder, which I really liked. So men communicate better when they're not facing each other. And we've spoken about this before, and I learned this recently, that it's actually, if you go to a party and you see men, even like this environment here, it's quite intimidating. It's kind of like you feel interrogated, it's face on. But if you go to a party, men actually kind of speak shoulder to shoulder, whilst women will be face on. Apparently it's some sort of evolutionary behavior that can be seen as an aggressive act. But how important, Tim, how important is it to have man time?
Really important. I work with a researcher who I just cannot stop shouting out. Her name is Dr. Susie Bennett. She's a PhD in male suicide. And she recognises that she's a woman and she's not the right person to be deciding what isn't important. So she put out a consensus to basically build an agenda for male suicide research. Like, what are the questions we need to answer? What are the most important things, the problems we have to solve for male suicide? That went out to hundreds of lived experience experts. So men dealing with suicide, families bereaved by suicide, and then also a huge amount of clinical experts. And they all put together a consensus. The number one cause, the number one most important thing to look into for suicide, according to these people, which was endorsed by 98% of them as important, or really important, loneliness. So it's safe to say loneliness could well be the most important problem or factor of male suicide. Suicide is the biggest risk to my life and your life today and tomorrow and every day for your entire sort of life until you're about 40 or even beyond that. So it's a big problem, like a massive problem. And that Robin Dunbar study, there are big question marks over how efficacious. It's not a great study to use. It's the methodology is difficult to understand. And I'm not endorsing that study, but what I did find interesting is how much people hated the findings. The findings from Robin Dunbar was like, men need to have 2 guy nights a week with the boys for their mental and physical health. That shouldn't be a controversial thing to say. And that doesn't mean going to the pub and getting pissed. It could just be playing computer games, or it could be having a walk, going for the dog. It could be going to the gym. It doesn't have to be the pub, and it doesn't have to be in person, although I think it's probably better that it is. But
part of it is like, how dare they?
The comments. You scroll down to the comments, and it's just the whining. Well, women need 6 nights a week. Or these are clearly men that aren't married or not doing enough child work. And, boo-hoo, men. And the problem I find is so frustrating. It's a 2-tier problem that I face. The first tier is the problem itself, in this case, loneliness. The second part of that problem are people that just whine about it and like just basically mischaracterize it and just deprive people of compassion and like just basically turn it into something it isn't. And I always think they're like the ogre guarding the door of men and boys in issues, and they're just swinging their club at anyone. They're just so belligerent. And although I have compassion for them, I'm getting tired of them just not actually listening. The fact that the things they're doing, they're vilifying the very antidote to male suicide. Like if suicide can be helped through helping male loneliness, and you're vilifying and mischaracterizing the antidote to male loneliness, like you're in many ways complicit in allowing this epidemic to just ravage men's lives across the country.
I don't think any woman can quite comprehend how difficult men's loneliness is.
Yeah.
But I've been lonely before, I'm sure you have, and it just takes you to a place that you'd never expect.
That's why I think, like I said, lockdown is important. I feel like everyone's put into that same sense of isolation and loneliness, like to be separate in that way, to be feared in that way. No one looks at you, no one smiles at you, everyone's afraid, it's cold, it's bleak, no physical interaction, no sort of kindness or physical touch. It's all illegal, and that's what it's like to be a man in a heightened way. And we all went through it, and I feel like that's a useful learning experience. And yeah, male loneliness is difficult to comprehend, and there's certainly work that men can do to build relationships, but the solution is not completely down to men, and we need to do more, especially calling out those who vilify such things, like who insist that women are included in these groups, or close down men's groups because they're sort of, mini patriarchies where men gather to oppress women, which is not what it is. Like, it's one of those things where people look at men's groups as if it's like some patriarchy HQ. If you actually look through the fucking door, they're probably just playing ping pong.
Yeah.
It's not that exciting, and it's not about you. Like, these are just guys just.
Are youth clubs still a thing? Have they all been shut down?
Youth clubs, yeah. Well, when everyone's going on about male violence, and yeah, most people, like I said, who are committing violence on the streets are men. And I'm like, a lot of those boys, young boys, would benefit from youth clubs, especially boxing societies. And yeah, youth clubs are sort of disappearing now, and I'm a big advocate of youth clubs. I think we need more, especially for boys.
I love youth club. Yeah.
And like, that's the other side of the coin. Like gangs, they're like families, and a lot of those boys are coming from families without dads. And they're looking for a sense of leadership, they're looking for a sense of belonging, they're looking for a sense of purpose and family, because there's not one at home, so they'll find one in a gang. And gangs exploit these boys. Those are like low-hanging fruit for gangs. And that's why the bigger problem is not only youth clubs, but just more positive male role models and a greater respect for dads. So more dads are more present in families, and that will obviously benefit everyone.
Going back to the point prior to that, at which point does feminism tip into misandry or misandry? I don't even know how to pronounce that second word because I've only just learnt it recently, but I've known about the word chauvinism all my life. But it's only just recently that I've learnt the word misandry or misandry. How do you pronounce it?
Misandry.
Okay.
I write that word a lot. I design all my content in a program called InDesign, and obviously I do a spell check every single time. And that word's still coming up as not recognised. Like, this is spelled wrong. I'm like, no, it's not. It's a real word. It's not even in like the spell checker. So I'm not surprised I don't know what it is, but it's the opposite misogyny, misandry. As for feminism, difficult. Feminism is a broad church. So many different types of feminists: conservative feminists, liberal feminists, trans excluding feminists, Marxist feminists, different waves of feminism, different parts of the world, and it's like difficult to speak about it in one breath. So I'm not going to do that. But my issue is not with individual feminists. Like someone that wants to have a bake sale to raise money for girls, or someone that's doing a fun run for breast cancer, like, I will donate money to you. I support that. That's amazing and important. In the same way that I recognise men's space is important to men, women's space is important to women. Like 100%. My issue is with feminism is the large, powerful, political feminist organisations who behind the scenes are kicking people like Erin Pizzey out of charities, who are advocating against fathers' rights, who are doing horrendous things, and no one's holding them accountable. Like the National Organisation for Women have like a sordid history of campaigning against equal rights for fathers across America, like a lot. And I'm like, that is not acceptable. And like the feminist groups are the ones that have been the architects of this gendered narrative of domestic violence that has excluded men and left men vulnerable to suicide. I'm like, that is not acceptable. So whilst I will applaud like individual feminists who want to do good things for women in good faith, genuinely believe that, when it becomes so powerful, these political groups are advocating against the very thing that feminism stands for. I think most feminists would be appalled by what I know about certain feminist groups. I don't think they stand for most feminists, but they have a.
So how much money is? I know so little about this. How much money is involved in these large feminist groups that they're pushing these agendas?
Oh, millions, tens of millions. Difficult. Like Women's Aid and Refugee UK are the big players in the UK. Women's Aid is a federation, so it's not one single group. Difficult to know where the money goes because it's going to different blocks. Refugee UK less so, but I mean 10 million a year more. And Mankind, who are the only refuge for male victims of abuse, they get zero. They got zero last year, as far as I'm aware. Nothing, not millions, nothing. And there's like, if you look at just support for male victims, there's none in London. So you're out of luck if you're looking for shelter.
There's not one in London?
No, as far as I'm aware, there's not one single shelter for male victims of abuse in London. And it's like, we're 1 in 3 victims. There should be more than 0. And nationwide, it's about somewhere between 1 and 5% of all refuges for men. That's me being generous. People would say, well, local councils have a legal obligation to shelter any victim regardless of gender, which is true. If you're a man being abused and you call up, they do have to give you shelter. But often they'll put you in a homeless shelter. And that isn't suitable because men can't take their children, first of all, to homeless shelter. And also you're in a shelter of people that have addiction problems. And it's just not suitable. We don't put abused women into homeless shelters, and nor should we. So you'll go into a homeless shelter or you'll go into like a Premier Inn, neither of which are suitable. And they're not suitable for women and they're not suitable for men. And like they've asked men, like Janice Hines, a great researcher who I'd like to speak to one day, she's called up these helplines and she's talked to men like, why don't you go get help? Why don't you seek shelter? Number one reason, I don't want to leave my children behind. That's why they stay, because they don't want to leave their kids. And like they're in an abusive family and they're like, I'd rather leave myself vulnerable to abuse so I can protect my children. And like, that is so sad. And like and then the second one's like, I believe she can change. Like I love her. And yeah, so shelters don't allow men, and those that do don't allow men and children, and they're not suitable. And that is a massive betrayal. Like we've all talked about the post office scandal, and that was horrible what happened to that. And I'm like, there is another scandal coming down the road, and it's going to be about the domestic violence industry. And that's the documentary I want to finance. Oh my God. And like, there is blood on the hands of the domestic violence industry, in my opinion.
Well, this podcast is called The Secret Life of Dads, and your Instagram page is full of secrets and misconceptions that potentially have been held back from the mass media. So encourage all our listeners to go and check it out. Where else can they find you online, or where else can they use the resources that you use to get educated on these topics?
Everything starts with Instagram for me, the Tin Men on Instagram, but I'm expanding to Twitter and LinkedIn and Discord and Reddit and YouTube. YouTube just set up.
Nice.
I'm literally on like 100 subscribers on YouTube, so it's depressing. So please keep following me on it. But Instagram, the Tin Men, is where you'll find me, I think. Yeah. And from there.
It's an amazing account, George. Thank you so much. And also thank you for just opening both of our eyes just a little bit more to the world that we've been conditioned to, just to understand a little bit more and create a bit more empathy for men. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being willing to have your eyes opened, because that's beyond most people in my experience.
Thanks, George.
It's nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Cheers, George. Your hair looks great.
First.
Oh, George, that was great, mate. Thank you
amazing.
so much.
Oh my gosh.
Do you know what? It's made me just want to go and read and study more.
There's
It's amazing the knowledge that you have.
I've seen that clock's counting down, but do you want to catch anything on? Talked about.
Is there anything else?
But only the dads thing, the sad dads.
The sad dads. Yeah, we've got a couple of minutes. What were we talking
It's
about?
like the only time we've been on time.
Great. No. The post. You did a post on. So you did a post on postnatal depression in men, and the stats. What was the study that you pulled up alongside it that it wasn't recognised?
It's not a study. The fact the stats are postnatal depression in men impacts about 8 to 10% of fathers and about 25% of mothers. So it's definitely a bigger problem for mothers, but that's not to say it doesn't impact dads. Another study found that 3 in 100 families, both the mother and the father, were suffering from postnatal depression. So that's where the child is really vulnerable, because no parent is operating in a place that's actually safe for that child. The thing you're talking about is the International Categorization of Diseases, the ICD, which is a universal language that all countries use to categorize depression, anxiety, OCD. Each one's given a code, so we know what you're talking about. And there is no code for postnatal depression in dads, which is amazing. Like, it just doesn't exist in the language of sort of medical disorders. And I've looked at the ICD codes, and there are some crazy things that have been given codes, and depression in dads is just not one of them. And
Give us some of the crazies.
I'll read them out to you.
Give us some of the crazies.
Honestly, you would not believe it. So I recommend you go and Google it yourself. This is a condition that impacts 8 to 10% of dads. Bear that in mind. Postnatal depression in men. Not recognised by the ICD at all. Doesn't exist in their opinion. But these things do exist and are therefore seemingly more important to them. Bitten by a dolphin. Roller coaster riding. Parachutist entanglement. Struck by a turtle. Discord of neighbours. Burnt due to water skis being on fire.
What?
No. Sibling rivalry. That's fair enough. Sucked into a jet engine. So there's a code for sucked into a jet engine. That's
I love that somebody's presented it to. What about postnatal depression? No, don't be stupid. Do you jet ski? Yeah. Do you water ski?
Yeah. Well, and then injuries from riding a roller coaster. I'd Google that, and I found that impacts 1 in a million roller coaster riders.
Oh my goodness.
And millions of dads have postnatal depression. Millions and millions, like 8 to 10%. That's quite low, but if you scale that up to a nation, that's a massive problem.
I'd imagine the numbers are much higher as well. I'd imagine so many dads don't come forward.
Imagine as a dad living depression, and you are seemingly less important than people that are getting tangled in parachutes.
Yeah, we did a post on it, and it was amazing the amount of men in the comments that went, holy shit, that's what I had. Oh my God, that's what it was.
I have a friend who's a male suicide researcher at Oxford University, and he stood up on stage to talk about postnatal depression in dads at a big conference, and he was literally laughed off stage. Literally laughing at him off stage. And he was just like, men have brains. Being a dad is also hard. These people are also vulnerable to depression. And like, you think it's a joke. And like, less important than these obscene things like roller coaster injuries and
dolphin. Then
dolphin. I mean,
yeah.
Dolphin bites are obviously really important. Let's not minimize.
Well, he should have given a talk on combustible water skis.
Yeah,
Then he would have been laughed off stage.
How is that a bigger problem than
I don't understand the process of that.
That sort of summarises it all. That
Yeah.
summarises it. That's where men's value is. You're less important than someone that's being bitten by a dolphin.
Well, that's what we're trying to change the narrative around. And yeah, thank you, George. That's a great way to wrap
You're welcome.
it up.
Thank you, George.
See you later.
The Secret Life of Dad.
Daddy made a podcast.